Welcome. I am Mrs. Maddie Partovi,
And I'm Dr. Ryan Partovi.
and in this episode of the Partovi Effect, I'd like to share a story about iatrogenic death and medical establishment negligence. Even though I think those words are too soft, so I'll tell you how my weekend was. You want to know how my weekend was?
I have some sense of it, but yeah, please share.
Yeah. So we were on a family Cub Scout campout. Okay. And interspersed with being present with the boys and really enjoying witnessing their delightful way of being and just being out in nature, I was
It was a
receiving,
great camp out,
it really was.
objectively.
I was receiving multiple messages from a family whose loved one was in the hospital with COVID.
So not great.
No. And they were strongly requesting a hospital rescue. And so I asked what state this woman was in, and she was 8 days unresponsive. And in order to do a hospital rescue, there are three qualifications. The patient has to be able to sit up.
And just to be clear, these are qualifications that we've come up with out of dealing with hundreds and several hundred now patients with active COVID, and where we know we can make a difference and where we're like, hey, this requires a level of care that it goes beyond what we're able to do remotely, and continue.
Yes. So patient has to be able to sit up. Patient has to be able to answer questions. And patient must be able to eat and drink and consume capsules, their medication.
Correct.
And so this woman had been unresponsive for 8 days. And so I did my thing. I was in constant communication, guiding them through, providing them with the hospital, the FLCCC hospital protocol, and Ralph Larigo's information. He's an attorney out of New York who's helped many families with this kind of thing where the hospital will refuse to implement anything on the FLCCC protocol. So I provided Ralph's information. I provided some, and I just, to protect us legally, some Wild West suggestions. And every single time this family had conversations with the
Well,
doctor.
I just want to clarify that because I'm not to interrupt you,
Yeah, I got
but
it.
just to really, so we're straight with our audience. It doesn't work for me as a physician to be giving medical advice, A, to someone who's not my patient, B, to somebody that's beyond the realm of where I can care for them. Maddie sometimes will ask me a question, my opinion about something, and I'll give her my opinion, and then she'll offer her advice as a layperson, but it's just layperson advice. It's not medical advice. She's not engaging in the practice of medicine. She's saying, if it were me, this is what I would do.
I'm being there for a friend.
Right.
So at each and every turn and each and every single conversation that they had with the doctors and the medical team there was a refusal to administer anything on the FLCCC protocol. The family did call Ralph. I'm not sure what the result was there, but I do know that a couple days ago, she texted me and she said that her mother-in-law's kidneys were failing, and that the doctors had even refused high-dose vitamin C. And they told her they didn't have any at the hospital. You know how easy a hospital can get that? The pharmacy can order that if they don't have it, if that wasn't a lie.
Same day delivery for sure. You have about a dozen different ways they could get it, maybe, well, half a dozen at least.
Yeah. And they, even early on, they were denying ivermectin. They were denying methylprednisolone and Lovenox, things that would have kept her kidneys from failing.
Probably anyway.
Probably anyway.
Yeah.
She would have had a better chance.
Yeah, a lot of times when in advanced COVID disease, when you have kidney failure, it's because of microangiopathy of the kidneys, where there's literally little microscopic blood clots that are forming in the capillaries, the small blood vessels of the kidneys. And that's what's causing the kidney failure. So what you need to do is anticoagulation, and you need to do it at a full dose, which typically is going to be about 1 milligram per kilogram of Lovenox per day. Lovenox, for those who don't know, is a low molecular weight heparin and life-saving in advanced COVID disease, where really it's clot formation that's killing people. Continue.
Yeah. So I asked her, I checked in with her. She's grateful for the suggestions I was providing and said that her husband will be talking to the doctors now. And then I asked her, how's your mother-in-law? That her doctors listen. And then I got the text. She said, hi, Maddie. The doctors did not listen, unfortunately. I'm here at the hospital as her body is shutting down and she is slowly transitioning.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all your help. My family is very grateful for all your advice. And then I said what I said. And then she said, well, I got the text on a couple days ago, or yesterday. She just passed. It's over. Thank you again for everything. It's like a flashback to 4 years ago for me.
It's not the first one we've experienced.
No, it's not.
No. It's like a continued flashback.
And it's like the same repeat conversation that I was having with so many families 4 years ago.
Yeah, and they're still using the same treatment too, which is, I mean, if you didn't understand why it was happening, you'd be like, that's unconscionable. We have so much evidence now. This is absurd. What are they doing? And then you remember, oh, it's a for-profit medical system. It's not really there for you and your health.
Yeah, but I also remember a point where I said, oh, she can be transferred. You can request her to be transferred to that hospital in Houston where they do administer the FLCCC protocol. And then you told me they shut that hospital down, or that hospital no longer exists.
Yeah.
That's why Dr. Joseph Verone is now the head of the.
Well, I don't want to say that because I don't know whether that's true or not.
Speculation.
Yeah, that's speculation. But I would say that, what I do think is pretty clear is that what they were accused of was basically overbilling health insurance providers for different hospital services, and I think COVID tests and stuff that gets billed all the time at hospitals. It's very clear to me that the accusation, and I told Maddie, I said, I wonder if maybe the American Hospital Association didn't send someone in there as like a plant in their billing department to go and do some fraudulent billing just so that they could catch them doing fraudulent billing and then basically accuse them of it. And then, well, I guess we must have had some fraudulent billing that went happen. And then here we are, we're closed. I mean, the thing about it is I wouldn't put it past them. Being the only hospital in the country that's using a different protocol that everybody knows is about 7.5 times more effective. I think conservatively we say it's 4 times more effective, but our estimates for our practice, it's about 7.5 times more effective than the traditional hospital protocol that's been in use now for the last almost 4 years. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty interesting that they went after that particular hospital. I mean, it's pretty suspicious in my mind just because you're getting these fantastic COVID outcomes with COVID pneumonia that nobody else is getting, but you're targeted for supposed corruption and have to shut down as a result. I mean, it's like Martha Stewart, right? It's like insider trading. Okay, maybe a little bit, but one amongst many people. She was sent to jail because she was a woman, in my opinion, who had engaged in insider trading, which at the time she did it was a big no. Now, as long as it's your husband doing the insider trading, it's okay, even if you happen to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives. So it's just the level of corruption in our society is like it is off the chart. So it's hard to say, well, because they made these accusations that there's any legitimacy to them. I mean, maybe there is, but I would just say that even if there is, it's one of those things that every hospital system engages in and every hospital system has engaged in since the beginning of COVID. And so the idea that they in particular are being targeted, I find, suspicious on the level of Martha Stewart suspicious.
So for this particular family, can I use her first name?
I'd rather you didn't.
Okay.
No identifying information.
All right. So for this family who suffered this tremendous and unjust loss, and the thousands of other families that have experienced the same thing, I can imagine the grief that you're dealing with. And on top of that, also the confusion about why these doctors and these hospitals wouldn't administer, especially now, these life-saving protocols. So we stand in solidarity with you. And it's just, I want the word to get out that this is still happening.
Yeah, and I want the word to get out that early treatment works.
Yes.
And so please don't wait until you or your loved one has been unresponsive in the hospital for 8 days to seek out our help. Because obviously there were probably dozens, if not hundreds of opportunities along the way that led to that point where we could have intervened and could have made the difference for her. And yet waiting till the last minute, I'm not trying to make anybody wrong here. I get that sometimes people feel like, oh, COVID's a nothing burger. You hear that all the time now. Oh, I've already had it once or twice. Well, I hate to break it to you, but the third or fourth or fifth time can often be the time where you're going to end up, especially with long COVID, long haul COVID syndrome. But some people who are really either the first time they got it, it was maybe Delta and they had received one of the vaccines. And so they had a little bit of protection. And then now they're really just getting it for the first time. Or maybe they're actually just literally getting it for the first time because they were locked down and they got lucky and this is their first round. And there's people dying from COVID every day in this country.
And you've got to consider your comorbidities.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you're over 60, if you're overweight, you have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, liver disease, lung disease, kidney disease, heart disease, any of those are all comorbidities. If you have an increased level of exposure, we would say you're higher risk. Not technically a comorbidity, but it falls in the same category. And if you have 2 or more of those, we still recommend ivermectin prophylaxis during the cold, flu, and COVID season, which is going on right now. And even if you have 1 or 2 of those comorbidities, or even if you have just 1 of those comorbidities or 0, it's absolutely a good idea to have all of your early treatment stuff lined up, which we offer a COVID prep package in our practice. That's one way to make sure you've got all that dialed in. Plus, it includes up to 30 days of care until you're well. Most people get well. If they start treatment on day 1, a lot of times people get well within 3 to 5 days, which is fantastic. But then if you wait till day 5 and then you reach out to us, which we still have plenty of those people, then oftentimes it's a 15 to 21 day disease. And we still have people reaching out to us day 28 to 29. Hey, I'm still sick from COVID. I just finished my second round of Paxlovid. And yeah, we can get those people well, but sometimes it takes months, right?
And so here is how we can help you. And here's how we can prepare you and your loved ones is with our COVID prep package. You have all the medications on hand in advance to start on day 1 of symptoms. You have access to a world-class team who will treat you for up to 30 days or until you're well and guide you through the process and make sure that spike protein doesn't accumulate in your body and start wreaking havoc. So for anybody that is new to the practice, new to Aspen Wellness Institute, you can purchase a COVID prep package down in the show notes. The investment is $395. For anybody who's already purchased a COVID prep package in the past and been treated by us, your next COVID prep package is $295.
It's like a renewal.
Yes. And for anybody that's on our wellness plan, you pay a one-time $395 and you will receive unlimited lifetime treatment of COVID, active COVID, as long as you're on our wellness plan.
Correct.
I just want to pause right there so that.
Yeah, I mean, really, our goal is to try to get as many people into the realm of early treatment as possible and to really get the word out. I mean, you never want, there's no guarantees in life, but I would, everything short of a guarantee say that woman would be alive today if she had been treating on day one with the COVID prep package. I can't imagine her ending up in the hospital. We haven't had anybody go to the hospital for COVID since we started using the early treatment protocol, and people who are using it, the protocol we're using now, which we've been using since beginning of, I want to say 2022, we've had 100% success rate. Those who are treated in the first 3 days, nobody's progressed to pneumonia, nobody's gone to the hospital. I mean, it's been literally 100% success rate amongst those patients. So,
and there are some things that will likely be happening this season for you coming up. Family gatherings, large gatherings. You'll likely be consuming extra carbs and sugar and alcohol. It's not going to be a good mix.
season of indulgence.
The season of indulgence.
Yeah.
So I just think, again, just emphasizing that early treatment is really crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Please reach out to us. Please click on the link in the show notes to get your COVID prep package now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'd like to address some of the questions that have been coming in from our
Sure.
community. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one other thing about that, which is that I always recommend that people who are new to the practice start with either the prep package or the wellness plan plus the prep package. And if you're taking ivermectin preventively, because it helps against pretty much any RNA virus, if you're taking it prophylactically during the season and you get through, because initially I think it comes with a couple of refills. And then once you've gone through those, we have a couple of different options for ongoing prevention for people who want to take it either during the season or even year round, because there's people with fatty liver or have other chronic conditions where they benefit from taking ivermectin year round. We do have options for those as well.
Fatty liver, high blood pressure.
We've had patients, yeah, I mean, so in the studies, the big study that looked at ivermectin for prevention, we saw improvements in blood pressure for people with high blood pressure, improvements in blood sugar for people who had high blood sugar, improvements in kidney function, improvements in reduction in elevated liver enzymes, again, for people with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or fatty liver. We saw reduction in autoimmune symptoms, and we've seen that. We have patients that take ivermectin ongoing because it helps with their autoimmune condition, because it does have broad anti-inflammatory effects and immune modulatory effects. There's also some evidence to indicate that there may be some reason to think that it might help reduce the risk of recurrence of certain cancers. And so we have patients that are, in remission from cancer and want to be on some kind of a preventive ivermectin for that purpose. So there's a lot of potential reasons. I mean, we've had patients come off of 3 or 4 different blood pressure medications after treating them from COVID, and they say, well, and then they run out of their ivermectin. They're like, my blood pressure's come back up. I need to have a refill on my ivermectin. I said, good, because ivermectin is dealing with the inflammation, which is underlying that blood pressure being elevated to begin with. And ivermectin is a soil bacteria derivative. It has a parabiotic effect. And I think that ultimately it's a much more natural intervention than pretty much any standard blood pressure medication for that reason. And one of the ways it's working is rewiring our gut microbiome in a way that I think is beneficial to metabolism, beneficial to long-term health. And I'm a big fan, obviously.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. I'll use initials, okay? Is that okay?
Go for it. Yeah,
All
that's
right.
fine.
This is from Mr. MJ. Good morning, Dr. Partovi and Maddie. I just watched your spike protein wreaking havoc, the hidden health crisis. It's very good. It did, however, raise some questions I've been storing the past couple of years, if I may. Since first contacting you a few years ago, I've been watching my health/diet. I tend not to contact you as I feel I'm healthy and try not to bother. Having stated this, I do have a couple questions which your video triggered. I received a bag full. What I have been experiencing are mild. I get welts or rashes frequently. I got a few, I believe, horsefly bites, which took months to go away, and a couple still persist. Terrible itching. I was hit with gout, which lingered for a few months, and I do not feel I totally recovered. I was quite interested in the blood type diet you were referring to. I am A positive. I have been on the carnivore BBBE and fasting recently. When eating regularly, I eat lots of vegetables and fermented foods as well. I try to only get organic and or local foods. Any advice on sugar cravings? The only thing I cannot eliminate or control. I do great for a while and then I
I'm going to
can't.
pause you because you've already gone over 3 questions.
Okay.
Remember, I can only handle one at a time.
Okay, got
So
it.
just
Okay.
let's go back to the first question and ask that.
Okay.
And then if you want to do more questions, we can do more.
Okay. Well, it's like he makes statements though. I was hit with gout, which lingered for a few months, and I don't feel totally recovered.
So is there a question mark anywhere in the question? That is helpful, by the way. If you're going to be submitting questions, please put a question mark after each question, and I'm happy to answer all of them.
He's had too many weird questions. My apologies. But here, okay, let me start with this, okay? So he said he's interested in the blood type diet. So his body, the wisdom of his body is calling forth something very important for him, especially as a blood type A positive, okay? That's on a carnivore diet. So why don't you address that first? Because especially because he has gout and that he's not feeling totally recovered. So why don't you start there?
I mean, actually, the first thing that came up for me in reading, which I would feel remiss if I didn't touch on it, was my question would be, has he had his anti-spike protein antibody titers checked? Because, and I don't know whether this is someone who's been our patient at all, but to me, anti-spike protein antibody titers are going to give us a sense of whether you may have long haul COVID syndrome and not even know it. There's a lot of people who have COVID, they get better, and then a couple of weeks later, they have some seemingly unrelated symptom that's actually related to COVID. And the way we distinguish that is through the anti-spike protein antibody titer test. We offer that for $60. Just the test itself is covered by insurance. $60 covers me ordering the test, sending you the requisition, then you go and get it filled. Your insurance covers it. So far, it's been 100% of the time. I don't think we've had anybody's insurance decline it yet. We get the result back, and then I send you the interpretation along with a copy of your result. And then you get to choose where you go from there. I would say in our practice, it's been about 50-50 in terms of the normal result and people who are abnormal. And sometimes it's really helpful. People are like, hey, I've had this issue ever since COVID. And we can tell them like, hey, it doesn't really seem like it's COVID related. I mean, it may be associated chronologically, but this is probably something that would have happened to you regardless. Alternatively, if the result is abnormal, then we could say, well, you should probably treat for long COVID first and then see if your symptoms get better. And so far, I would say the answer to that has been a resounding yes, pretty much across the board in terms of the efficacy of treating for the long COVID or the vaccinosis, vaccine injury, and then that having the ripple effect of dealing with whatever the symptom is, whether it be autoimmunity or some brain fog or cardiovascular issues. I mean, we've seen it all.
That spike protein test, that $60 for a lot of people has altered the trajectory of their life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some people test quarterly because it's not like you test once and then your levels are fine and then you're fine for the rest of your life. There are different exposures that you go through when you live life and when you travel and when you get exposed to people and each time you get COVID untreated.
Well, and see, that's the thing is some people get COVID and they don't realize that they had COVID. And so maybe they didn't treat. And we've had patients where maybe even we treated them the first time they had COVID, but then they ended up getting COVID a second or third time and they didn't bother getting treated. And then we check their antibody titers and they're elevated. And it's, well, probably because they didn't treat the second or third time.
Okay, so Mr. MJ, you could start there.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. I think that's the obvious place to start. Carnivore diet, I don't recommend that for blood type A's. There's different types of A's, and we get into that with our practice looking at genotype, which is like the epigenetic archetype of the individual. So there are A's with kind of that are explorers who need to be on, who don't follow the typical A high soy diet. Are they on a high red meat diet? No, I don't really recommend a high red meat diet for any type A's. An A explorer may be able to have a little more lamb than, say, an A teacher or a warrior would. But that's the beauty of personalized medicine with the software we use. Really delve in and get all your measurements. And we looks at genetics, epigenetics, which is like the blind control settings on the genes, family health history, personal health history, presenting symptoms, lab data, biometrics, which are measurements of the body. We put all that in the computer program, and it performs 12 million calculations and generates an individualized nutrition plan, recipe book, meal planner for that person where they are right then on their health journey. It's not surprising to me to hear that, hey, cultured vegetables and things like that are what you naturally gravitate toward. And it's also not surprising to me that you might have gout, especially on a carnivore diet, just because for some people, what really perpetuates the gout is more of a candida overgrowth, because candida can produce gout, or sorry, uric acid as a byproduct. But for a lot of people, it is the purine consumption. Too much meat is, and their body just has a hard time eliminating it. There's other things that can also affect gout, and purine elimination, purine creation, but mostly purine elimination. Sometimes they don't have enough vitamin C. I mean, there's vitamin C helps eliminate uric acid, and there's other things that can get into the inflammation of the joints.
Well, first of all, my type A's out there don't have the sufficient level of stomach acids to digest large amounts of beef, and
Mhm.
especially if they're eating beef every day.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I don't know if it's directly related to the gout piece. Maybe I'd have to think about it some more. But I mean, I think it's true that type A's have the lowest level of stomach acid, followed by ABs, followed by Bs, and then type O's have the highest level of stomach acid production on average. The other thing I would just say is that non-secretors typically have lower levels, and you may be a non-secretor. It's hard to say, but non-secretors tend to have more cardiometabolic issues in general. And I'm not sure about gout, though. That's an interesting question. I'd have to look that up.
Okay.
Very possibly.
Okay. Well, the last thing I wanted to address was his sugar cravings.
Hmm.
And that might be a fundamental deficiency in some.
Chromium.
Mhm.
Yeah, it could be that. Could be candida overgrowth. I already mentioned that. That can be tied to gout. I think that for most type A's, in my mind, if you're getting enough complex carbohydrates, I can't imagine why you'd be getting sugar cravings. Now, I can imagine a type O on a diet where they're not able to sufficiently liberate enough glycogenic amino acids from the diet because they're on a carnivore diet might have sugar cravings just because they're having carb cravings, right? Because their body is really needing some glucose and having trouble getting any. So yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable. But you can take there's a lot of ways to deal with sugar cravings. I find that typically when people are off of refined sugar for 3 months, after about 90 days of zero refined sugars, those will typically go away. If the rest of the diet is good and in alignment with your physiology, I don't really find people continue to have sugar cravings. Now, there's such a thing as sugar addiction, which I personally struggle with, which is you can't just have a little bit of it. So if you're going to have some, it's, oh God, it's your tendency is to want to gorge. And I think that's a real phenomenon. And to me, I think the solution that I've found that works for me is really A, be mindful of that, and B, don't really have any sugar. Find other sweet things that are not refined sugar to help deal with that. And that's the interesting thing about having a keto cookie that's made with monk fruit sweetener, is that you're really not going to want to sit there and have a dozen of them. After three or four, they're so heavy and there's so much fat in them, and the sweet is just not, it's not the kind of sweet that you can just eat forever. And that's actually a really good thing, I think, if you have sugar cravings. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of those are type A friendly things. So it's not like you have to The type A, you've got to eat a bunch of refined sugars. I think it's the opposite, actually. I mean, the warrior diet is a pretty low grain diet, actually, and that's a lot of type A's, I would say. I don't know the exact percentage, but I know that I think the majority of warriors are type A's for sure. And a lot of A's that struggle with sugar and glycation and processing of sugars are warriors. That's their epigenetic archetype. And they need to be on, frankly, a little bit lower carb, but not a zero carb diet. I mean, it's not a zero carb diet, but it's a lower carb. It's not like this grain heavy diet. I think people think of when they think of type A's, they think of just, oh, eat as many grains as you want. But that's not the case for either warrior type A's or explorer type A's. Those two genotypes need to stay away from unmitigated carbs. It's pretty much the teachers that
Yeah.
can
You
go.
know, that
But even they, I mean, have their limits. So
you would learn so much about this in the wellness plan. And if you
and
mentioned,
that book Change Your Genetic Destiny, frankly. I mean, all
yeah,
of these different categories I'm talking about, all the 6 genotypes, they're all in there, and there's profiles. And as a type A, you can be either a teacher, a warrior, or an explorer. Based on your clinical history, I'm going to guess either a warrior or an explorer, but you never know. But the beautiful thing about doing the wellness plan is it includes Swami, which is a software that's going to basically calculate all that out for you, so you don't have to worry about it. It includes the kit that you need to collect the information to put into the software. So it's really a one-stop shop, comprehensive approach rather than trying to piecemeal it and
right, especially if
DIY.
you're already interested in up leveling your health and you're eating healthy and you're already purchasing organic foods. This is like that missing puzzle piece that will alchemize everything. It's going to be so beautiful. So listen to this, Mr. MJ, and then I'll reach out to you and have a conversation with you. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing I would just say about that before we move on to the next one is just that it's really important for people to remember that there is no one size fits all diet for each individual. And I think that's one of the common mistakes that's made. And it's often made in the integrative holistic community. I mean, we see that even I mean, I'm the last one in the world who ever say anything that's remotely negative about the FLCCC, but I will say that I think one of the blind spots of the organization is that there's a tendency to go along with, oh, everybody should just go keto, or that's going to work for everybody. And I think the answer is there is evidence that time delayed eating, I would say it can be helpful for most people, but the time delay does vary on the individual for sure. And you have to customize that. And to me, intermittent fasting, where you're literally taking days off of eating, there's cost to that in terms of muscle mass. And I think that we could probably do a whole episode on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. This next question is from Miss JT. She's dealing with cancer.
Okay.
She said, hello.
Say what kind of cancer?
I would have to do a little digging.
Okay.
So the neuropathy has worsened since last chemo infusion, but was present pre-chemo. Would Dr. Ryan consider a paid consult regarding the neuropathy specifically if he has some insight into dealing with it? It's a notoriously hard thing to treat. I've spent over $2,000 so far with CNAR and software treatments with no improvement. I don't yet have my arterial Doppler test results. B vitamin levels have been good, but want to get them retested since the chemo. I'm now using an antifolate, and they supplement for folic acid versus methylated folate. Not sure if I impaired circulatory or nerve damage dysfunction is main etiology. Let me know.
Etiology.
Etiology.
Cause.
And let me know if a consult and follow-up is needed, is recommended and appropriate.
What was the
Thanks
sentence
much.
before the etiology? Okay. If it's impaired circulatory or nerve jam. Yeah, I mean,
Okay, hold
look,
on.
go ahead.
So I'm going to address this question about a one-off paid consult.
Yeah, we don't do that.
We don't do that. It doesn't have integrity for us to take your money for a one-stop shop, because Dr. Ryan will only be able.
Well, I wouldn't say a one-stop shop. I would say for people looking for a one-trick pony would probably be the better analogy here, right? Because our approach is fundamentally holistic, right? Do you want me to speak to this, or
I just want to say that yeah, so it doesn't have integrity for us to take your money for a one-time consultation, because
Because I'm not a one-trick pony.
Because here it is, okay? You, Dr. Ryan, will only be able to talk about possibilities
Yeah.
and not bring these possibilities into fruition, which take time. And over almost 15 years of practice, you've seen so much. You've seen the power of the kind of medicine that you practice and the science that you practice alter people's lives. I mean, it works. It works for those that are coachable. So that's what I have to say. What do you have to contribute to, Ms.?
Well, what I have to say to Ms. JT and anybody else who's looking for a single issue consult, I would just say that because of the fact that it's a holistic practice, because of the fact that we're looking at the cause and we have to do investigations, we have to do lab work and figure out, okay, what is the cause? I'm happy to answer those kind of questions on the podcast so everybody can benefit from them. But in terms of dealing with an individual, the reason why we have people commit to working with us for at least a year is because that's what we found works. We've tried the one-off consult thing. The problem is that people will often, because they're not committed, what will often happen is that you're going to have a group of people that do really well, and then they feel like, oh, I got it. I don't need any more follow-up. And then 6 months, 9 months, a year later, they're back where they started because they don't have a structure in which they are held accountable to the changes that they made. And then the other group of people you have are people who either didn't implement anything or they only tried some of it and it didn't work. And so because of that, they get discouraged and they obviously are still not following up. And the only way to come back around and say, okay, well, here's what you didn't do. Here's what would have made a difference. Or, okay, you did this, but you didn't do this. Let's try this next, right? Is to actually have that structure of accountability. So regardless of the trajectory of the first 3 months, having a structure of accountability actually is what works to have life work and to have treatment work. And so that's why we have everybody commit to working with us for at least a year, is because it's what actually works for them at the end of the day, whether they realize it or not, whether they want to accept that or not. That's what we have learned works for people, for humans, including us. We have to have a structure in which we live our lives. Otherwise, it's transformation has an extremely short shelf life, as the famous saying goes. Specifically around the question of neuropathy, specifically related to chemo, I would say that it is possible that B vitamin, specifically B12, could be at play here. It's worth it to look at your genetics, look at the vitamin D receptor, look at the methylfolate, look at the COMT and see, okay, well, should I really be doing hydroxycobalamin, maybe methylcobalamin, maybe add cobalamin, figure out which forms of vitamin B12 you really should be supplementing. You can look at MMA, methylmalonic acid. You can look at homocysteine. You can look at serum B12. Sometimes that's going to show, I mean, if it does show a frank deficiency, that's a pretty clear cut. Yep, you need to supplement B12. But those are not always going to be as revealing as one would hope. The other thing is you have to use a really narrow reference range for homocysteine, which is about 5.5 to 7, which frankly, most doctors don't do, but that's really where you want to see it. And methylmalonic acid isn't even the high normal range. I would say that's high. And B12, if it's not at least 800, then it's at least suboptimal. So I would keep that in mind. Being on methotrexate and then being on folic acid really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. My understanding is you really want to be, and this is not necessarily my area of expertise, but I have some knowledge of it. My understanding is you really want to be on calcium folinate, which is folinic acid, if you're on methotrexate, because that's the one that will bypass the step which methotrexate is trying to block. That's my understanding there. Really, the guru on this is, what's his name? The Seeking Health guy. It's going to come to me in a second. Dr. Lynch, Ben Lynch. He's the guru on methylfolate, and I know he would know that answer off the top of his head. But I would say that my understanding is if you're on methotrexate, excuse me, then calcium folinate or even MTHF is the 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate is really are much better choices. Frankly, supplementing with folic acid, I think is generally a mistake and something which there's even been some negative toxicity reports associated with. And I haven't delved into that deeply, but I just know that's what the word on the street right now in the integrative holistic naturopathic world is regarding folate supplementation is that folic acid is not what you want to be doing. So I would just make sure it's not actually folic acid, that it's folinic acid, or calcium folinate is another term for that, or 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate is fine too. And then, but I got to say, all of that interesting conversation aside, really where I find most of the issue in neuropathy related to chemo is,
She did say
and
it was present pre-chemo,
it does depend
but
on the
it's worse.
chemo. I hear you.
Okay.
And that's why I spent so much time on the B vitamin stuff, because that's certainly a possibility. It's also not an either or. It could be that there was some B vitamin deficiency, and now that's now been has something superimposed on top of it, which is mitochondrial toxicity, which is what I was about to get into. So I think that it's very possible that with mitochondrial toxicity that you do see with a lot of different chemos, and mitochondrial toxicity could be some of the underlying cause of the cancer to begin with, right? That can be part of what sets you up for impaired detoxification, increased oxidative damage, and DNA damage, which can lead to the cancer. But yeah, I think that alpha lipoic acid, specifically R lipoic acid, also known as thiotic acid, can be really helpful, both orally as well as IV. And sometimes you may need to use higher doses, like 300 to 600 milligrams of R lipoic acid orally per day. And you may need to use other mitochondrial support, things like PQQ and CoQ10, ubiquinol. There's some evidence that if you have a really well absorbed CoQ10, it doesn't necessarily have to be ubiquinol, but then some studies indicate maybe ubiquinol is a little better. So it just depends on the form, I would say, and the absorption capacity of it. I certainly have brands that I like and recommend, but we don't get into that on the podcast unless they start paying us for it. But yeah, I mean, the other thing I would say is IV, the MVA IVs, which are basically IV alpha lipoic acid, that are used a lot of times adjunctively in cancer, I think would be a wise approach for dealing with specifically neuropathy secondary to either cancer and or the treatment of cancer. And I mean, we certainly have people that we know who do them. I mean, in San Diego County, we have couple of friends of mine that I went to school with who do those kinds of IVs. And I have a friend in Scottsdale, Arizona who does them. And I have friends either all over the country, or I can always find someone. I mean, we had this patient who reached out to us who's some small town in Arkansas, and we managed to find an IV place that does even things like methylene blue IVs and NAD plus IVs in this small town in Arkansas. So that was pretty cool. The point is they're out there and we can find them for people who are patients. We're happy to do that. And that's what I have to say about that. I mean,
Yeah.
and then there's obviously with the circulatory stuff, that's a whole nother can of worms. And it does depend to some degree, again, on the chemo, and there's potential cardiac issues involved in there. And that one sort of becomes way too complex to just opine on off the cuff. But I would say that it's something that certainly we could investigate inside of a therapeutic relationship, and we're happy to do that.
And on that note, we do have 3 levels of cancer care, from ivermectin prescriptions and access to monthly Q&As to custom cancer care. And that will also be in the show notes.
I can't remember. Have we talked about ivermectin for cancer?
During the first episode, maybe
Maybe.
two-part episode, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a couple of clinical trials, and then a lot of really interesting in vitro and in silico research looking at ivermectin in different types of cancer. So it's a really promising, and then we've had some really promising anecdotes, case studies that have been really promising.
Yeah, I just want to read one. Can I read one?
I mean, if you want to, but I would just say before you do that, because of that, it's just because of 4 billion doses administered, 3,000 adverse events reported, statistically safer than Tylenol, safer than aspirin. It's like, why should this not be available to people who want to add it into their cancer therapy? And so that's really the way to think about option one, is it's really people they've already got an oncologist, they're already working on their cancer through other means, but they want to add the ivermectin piece in, and their oncologist doesn't know enough about it, doesn't feel comfortable. Then we can support people with that. And then option two is for people who really want to do a more comprehensive repurposed drug-based approach to their cancer, which the FLCCC has the protocol that Dr. Merrick has developed for the repurposing of a lot of different generic drugs for cancer treatment. And again, all that can be done alongside traditional chemo, radiation, surgery. It's not an either or kind of thing. But option 2 really gives you access to that full protocol, but in a sort of a DIY form where you can really take it on and do as much or as little of it as you'd like to, and still come on and consult with me on the monthly calls and get my advice and feedback. And this is what I would recommend doing and or not doing. And then option 3 is, did you talk about option 3 much?
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Option 3 is really the comprehensive cancer care where regardless, you still have to have a local primary care doctor. But for people who are the conventional medical establishment has washed their hands of you and said, there's nothing more we can do for you. Or for people who are just looking at more of a comprehensive natural option, that can be a really good option because it's a customized, really targeted approach. Now, a lot of times what I'll do inside that approach is say, well, I want you to go get your primary tumor removed, and here's the surgical oncologist who will actually do it. I know you saw this other guy, he said he wouldn't do it, but I know somebody, and here's the person who should do it. And they will. Sometimes they won't. And then, of course, we'll try to approach things as many different ways as we can. But a lot of times, finding an oncologist who's willing to work with you, maybe to try immunotherapies before traditional chemotherapy, which is something which is very radical in the conventional oncologic world, but it's something which to me is pretty uncontroversial. They're doing it in a lot of other countries. There's a lot of reason to do that because the long-term side effects of a lot of the immunotherapies are a lot fewer than a lot of the long-term side effects of traditional, what we like to call somewhat not affectionately slash and burn chemo. And our view is really that slash and burn chemo is probably a better last ditch option than a first ditch option. And I think that's, again, pretty radical if you're coming from conventional oncology. But if you look at the latest evidence, it's not as radical as one might think. But a lot of times what our goal is as a practice is to try to bring the latest evidence to the person. Obviously, we can't do chemo. That's not part of what we do, but we can find you a local oncologist who doesn't necessarily work as part of the hospital system. They're in private practice. They're part of the 20 or 30% of doctors still with the freedom to practice medicine. And we coach you in, okay, how do you communicate with these guys such that they'll be willing to give you the treatment that the evidence supports and that you'd like to try before you try the slash and burn method. And so that's a lot of what we do as well, is actually helping facilitate in that option 3, helping to facilitate the correct, intelligent choice of which biomedical interventions are most likely to be a benefit. There's a specific testing that we do to help facilitate that determination, even help us find clinical trials. So anyway, you got me on a subject which I'm excited about. So feel free to interrupt me.
Well, I wanted to read this because these lives, I mean, we celebrate news like this. And I remember getting this message. Anna, our office manager, texted me and showed me the screenshot. And I took pause and I leaned against the wall in the hall and I started to tear up. And when I shared it with you, you just had this really beautiful, refreshing reaction to it. But this is from Mrs.
What was my reaction? You have to remind me.
Oh gosh, it was you said we were doing God's work.
Hmm.
And it occurred to me as if you were humbled by that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is from Miss MD. I would like to report to you and your staff that since I have been on the ivermectin, 2 scans have showed no activity of the tumor or any activity of cancer throughout my body. PET scan. Thank you all for what you do for us.
All right. It's exciting.
Yes. Yeah, I look forward to all of our cancer patients experiencing a transformation in what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we certainly, where we're coming from, is that's certainly possible. And that kind of result is possible for every single one of them.
Yes.
And it may not be as simple as adding in ivermectin for everyone, but that's certainly a part of it. And also part of it is finding the right dose. And the nice thing about what the alliance we've created with Natural Med Choice is they have the ability to offer ivermectin at any dose at the same price. So what that means is that as cancer patients need to increase their dose, sometimes double or even quadruple their dose, that they can do that without it necessarily costing them anymore, which is literally a lifesaver. So,
Yeah, you won't have to deal with any, pharmacies that either will not dispense medication anymore or have been shut down, or yeah, we will support you with all of that.
or who charge per milligram, right? And that's a big thing, especially with cancer dosing, is where you need to really escalate the milligram amount. You're stuck between trying to source your ivermectin from some other country where it may or may not even be legitimate, or paying astronomical prices. And that's a devil's bargain.
That's something that we're very soulfully committed to, that these medications be accessible to
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah. And people not be put in that situation. Yeah.
All right, next question, final question. Okay.
Okay, good.
One of our beloved friends, Mr. SH, would like us to would like us to
I know who that is. That's why I'm laughing.
we love you so much.
Uh,
LPR and GERD. I know that's a very broad. He said, talk about LPR and GERD.
So he's dealing or his question is about laryngopharyngeal reflux, or LPR, and GERD, you said?
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, to me, laryngopharyngeal reflux, or what we will now be calling LPR for the rest of this episode, it's a subset of GERD. So GERD is gastroesophageal reflux disease. And what's happening there is that stomach acid levels are not high enough in the stomach. And because the stomach acid levels are not high enough, you end up with the lower esophageal sphincter, which is the sphincter at the bottom of the esophagus, right where it attaches to the stomach. That remains patent, it remains open. And so you get reflux of the stomach contents, usually at least some acid, and that can cause some erosive esophagitis. It can cause, ultimately, even certain types of cancers can be associated with it if it continues on long enough. But heartburn is the most common symptom, right? LPR is where you don't actually have the heartburn symptom, but you do end up with reactive airway disease, which can often be like diagnosed as adult onset asthma. And the interesting thing about that is that it's adult onset asthma that then, if you treat by either doing digestive bitters, you treat it as if it were GERD. So you treat this reflux through doing either digestive bitters, or digestive bitters, which digestive bitters have to be taken typically within 5 minutes of when you start to eat. They really help stimulate that acid production. Usually try to start with that, and as well as like matching the diet to the blood type and the secretor status and genotype and all of that. And if that's not sufficient, then we can actually supplement hydrochloric acid through the form of betaine HCl. And there's a couple different ways philosophically that people do that. Some people will do it until the symptoms go away. And some people will do it until the patient actually gets worse heartburn and then back off, because it's actually at that point not heartburn, it's actual gastritis. So the question is the correct dose of betaine HCl the amount that relieves symptoms, or amount just below the amount that's going to cause gastritis? And like I said, there's two schools of thought there. I don't have a strong opinion either way. I'm absolutely willing to guide patients through whichever approach makes the most sense to them, or one that they want to try. Honestly, I find most of my patients respond really well to dietary change, following a serotype specific diet, genotype, and secretor status specific diet, as well as occasionally taking some digestive bitters. So I really don't find that we have to really resort to the betaine HCl that often, especially if also we do a nice gut cleanse, and which we do that with all of our new patients on the wellness plan. And the gut cleanse kind of resets everything, gets the microbiome where it should be, and that's also going to facilitate um, it's going to facilitate the correct microbial balance, which will also facilitate the correct acid production. Because the one thing you have to keep in mind is that there are specific bacteria, including H. pylori is probably the most famous one, that actually inhibits stomach acid production. So one of the sort of probable underdiagnosed causes of LPR in my mind would be H. pylori overgrowth in the stomach. And so a lot of times you treat the H. pylori, which the initial gut cleanse we do contains specific lectins that actually help bind H. pylori and eliminate it through the gut. And then you get stomach acid production back up. That lower esophageal sphincter closes, the LPIR ends, and there's the LPR ends, and then you end up with a reduction, if not elimination, in the asthma symptoms. Now, there's a lot of different causes of reactive airway disease, adult onset asthma. We've talked a little bit about that before, I think, and at least some of the recordings that we've made. I don't know if any of them have made it to the podcast yet, but I do know that that's definitely a deep well to plumb, if you will. And I think we could probably have a whole episode just on adult onset asthma and etiology of it and different etiologies of it and why it's so often called asthma when it's probably more likely or more accurately called reactive airway disease, and whether there even such a thing as adult onset asthma, and whether asthma is a necessary diagnosis to begin with, or if it's really more of a function of modern lifestyle. So maybe we'll do an asthma episode. That'd be interesting.
Mm.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Mr. SH, we love you and we miss you.
Amen.
All right, I'd like to end with an acknowledgement of you, actually.
Whenever you acknowledge me, I feel like I need to acknowledge you. So
You don't have to.
I don't have to. Yeah. So for the husbands and men out there, that means you have to. Okay?
No,
That's what that means.
Although words are my number one
Number one love language. I know. I know.
So there's one of our wellness plan patients who recently got diagnosed with a high chance of developing Alzheimer's. Is that correct? Yeah. And she's been in quite a bit of distress and sadness and grief. She lost her husband recently and she recognized
to
COVID.
Yeah, that's an important piece of that story, in
Yes.
my opinion.
And she recognized the news of this as another grieving process, like grieving back to back. And I'm privy to your text exchange with each other and the way that you, with your, 10-minute, 12-minute voice messages, that you're really not only providing a clear pathway to treat it and to empower her, but you do something that's so distinct. You are a human being there and supporting and loving on another human being. And when I see her respond with all the love in return and the emojis and the hearts and the ease that she experiences through your words. It really has me be present to the man that you are. There's no division, really. That love extends to everybody the way that it extends to me and our boys.
I think if they're a call for it, they're a request for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's really, that care is really potent and palpable and extra. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think what I would, just to comment on that before I acknowledge you, I mean, we don't really talk about religion too much on this channel, but I would say that for me, um, that is the relationship that God calls us, each and every one of us, to be in. God is there for us if we are a call for God to be with us. And I think that is, I mean, I feel a bit edified and humbled to basically be told that I'm a reflection of that with our patients. And that's a beautiful thing. I think to me that to me speaks to the God's love which shines through each of us when we have the opportunity to contribute to each other. And I think I mean, that's what I would want to hear in an ideal world. So thank you for bringing an ideal world to the call today. That's a beautiful thing. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how I'm going to top that, but I will just say this. I'm definitely present to and moved by your love for people, your commitment to making a difference for people. You were on the phone with throughout the Cub Scout camp out and really throughout the whole better part of the week with this family member of the person who was in the hospital and constantly in an inquiry of what can we do to make a difference. You compiled the list of the FLCCC doctors near this person, sent those over. I mean, really went above and beyond for somebody who has never paid us a dime and nor would we accept any money from. But that to me just speaks to you and your heart and your desire to be of service to people and support them with what they're dealing with, and your commitment that nobody else die from this disease, which I think is a beautiful thing. And I think it was a tragic situation. And I know that you were affected deeply by it. And there's times where I think a little more resigned and cynical than you are about it.
Well, for me,
And I
somebody's
appreciate,
mom.
absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. I got that. And I wish there's more we could have done. But I mean, I don't know. To me, we're already skating the limit of what's possible. But I just really, I appreciate your stand. I appreciate your commitment and your stand that we make every little bit of difference we can for the people that reach out to us and ask for our help. And I know it was not easy because I know you took it on, like really. And when she takes it on, she takes it on. And yeah, there is definitely a sense that we're on a mission here and we're instruments. And I mean, I pray it every week that I be an instrument of God's will and God's grace. And my hope is that that's who we are.
Yeah.
My hope and my prayer, literally.
Yes.
So yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna pivot my internal energy right now, okay?
Go ahead.
Today we had the blessed opportunity to celebrate our son's third birthday. The cheeky and fully self-expressed, joyful little one. And his favorite color is purple. So we had purple balloons, purple party gift bags, purple lights, and purple everything,
Oh,
and
everything.
a
Purple cake.
a
Yes.
decadent purple cake.
Yes.
And
Courtesy of Chef Joe.
yes, and this is lead into our next episode where I'd like to address another beloved friend's question. Why do you eat the way you eat? So I would love for you to share what that purple cake was made of.
Oh, the purple cake was mostly made of, our initial plan was to go with a grape theme, and there was some all fruit grape, and I want to say pomegranate and morello cherry. It was like a mixture of some different dark fruits jam that we used as a filler. But the cake itself is mostly, we make our own baking powder because most baking powder is full of aluminum and you can't, or cornstarch, and we don't eat that stuff. But beyond that, I mean, arrowroot flour, almond flour, eggs. We took some freeze dried organic berries, ground those up, put those in. Um, I didn't actually make the cake. I bought the ingredients and came up with the concept, but then Chef Joe made the cakes. That was the cake itself. And then we did the jam layer in the middle. And then the icing also is butter. The butter, oh, and there's butter in the cake too. But the butter we get is grass-fed organic from New Zealand. It's PFAS free, which unfortunately it turns out Kerrygold is not. So look it up, PFAS Kerrygold, if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's got forever chemicals in it. That's probably a whole nother episode. But anyway, so we're using this new Zeal Creamery, which they should definitely endorse our channel, but they haven't yet. Anyway, that's a fantastic butter. And we use some of that as also to make a buttercream with some Lecanto monk fruit sweetener. Oh, there was some raisin paste that we did because we wanted the grape theme. So there was some raisin paste in the cake itself, which is just basically you rehydrate raisins and then blend them up. And that's raisin paste, but it's like a sweetener. And that also gives a little bit of a grapiness to it. And then some more, I mean, we use natural food colorings that are from Whole Foods that are just basically like different fruits and vegetables, but the powder of them, and they make them into a liquid and you use. Anyway, we did that with the Lecanto monk fruit sweetener, the confectioner's version with the butter, and also some fresh berries, and not fresh berries, more freeze dried, but ground up and mixed in to give it taste and some tartness. And
It was such a beautiful, refined, sugar-free, gluten-free cake.
Yeah, it's grain-free, refined sugar-free.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
I just noticed our son stamped you with his taco stamp. And it's been showing on. I have one too.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sufficiently clear.
Okay, great.
And I love doing this with you.
Yeah, likewise.
All right.
So I'm Ryan Partovi. I'm Dr. Ryan Partovi.
And I am Mrs. Maddie Partovi. And one day I'll share why I always say I'm Mrs. Maddie Partovi. It's an inside joke.
This has been the Partovi Effect, Creating the Consensus. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time, attention, dedication, commitment to yourself and your own well-being and the well-being of others and the planet as a whole.